For decades, Nashville built its legends on glitz and glory, but behind the rhinestones and the spotlight were secrets buried so deep, fans never knew the truth. Until now. From hidden scandals and banned songs to shocking revelations that only surfaced years later, these are the stories the industry hoped you'd forget. Join us as we uncover 12 forgotten country music secrets that finally came to light and reveal the truths that changed country music forever. Hank Williams, the truth behind a tragic ending. When people think of the birth of modern country music, one name stands out above all others: Hank Williams. His haunting voice and heartbreaking lyrics, "I'm so lonesome I could cry," and "Your Cheating Heart," set the template for the genre. Yet, while the world adored the songs, they knew very little about the man behind them. For years, Hank's legacy was wrapped in mystery, and the truth about his life and death remained hidden. At the height of his fame in the early 1950s, Hank was more than just a country star. He was a cultural force. But his personal life was plagued by chronic back pain, dependence on alcohol, and an addiction to morphine. Nashville executives worked hard to protect his image, hiding his struggles from fans. They needed Hank to stay the clean-cut face of country music, even as his demons consumed him. The darkest secret came in 1953. Hank was found dead in the backseat of a Cadillac on New Year's Day, just 29 years old. The official cause was heart failure, but whispers told another story. One of overdose, reckless prescribing by doctors, and a music industry that turned a blind eye. Rumors swirled that Hank had been injected with morphine hours before his death, a truth Nashville did everything to bury. For decades, the details were obscured, and fans were left with a sanitized version of Hank's end. But documents and testimonies that emerged later painted a far grimmer reality. A legend abandoned by the very machine that made him famous. His death was not just a tragedy, it was a cover-up, exposing how far Nashville would go to protect its image. Today, Hank Williams is remembered as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. But his story is also a reminder of the heavy price of fame and the forgotten secrets that defined the early days of country music. Patsy Cline, letters that predicted the tragedy. Few voices in country music carry the timeless magic of Patsy Cline. With songs like Crazy and I Fall to Pieces, she redefined what it meant to be a country artist, bringing soul, elegance, and raw emotion into every note. By the early 1960s, she wasn't just a rising star. She was one of the first women to stand shoulder to shoulder with the greats in a male-dominated industry. But behind her soaring success lay private fears that seemed almost prophetic. Patsy had survived a horrific car crash in 1961, one that left her hospitalized for months. While recovering, she confided in close friends and even wrote letters that revealed something chilling. She believed she wouldn't live long. Friends recalled her saying she felt like she was living on borrowed time. Nashville, however, kept these worries hidden. To the public, Patsy was unbreakable, a glamorous pioneer for women in country music. But in reality, she carried a sense of foreboding that shadowed her every step. On March 5, 1963, tragedy struck. Returning from a benefit concert, Patsy's plane went down in Tennessee, killing her and 3 others. She was only 30. At the time, her death shocked the world, but it wasn't until years later that her private letters and conversations surfaced. They revealed that Patsy had long anticipated an untimely end, a haunting truth Nashville never wanted fans to know. Those letters, along with testimonies from close friends like Loretta Lynn and Dottie West, reshaped how fans understood her final years. They showed a woman both determined to break barriers and deeply aware of her own fragile mortality. It was not just an accident. It was almost as if Patsy had seen it coming. Today, Patsy Cline's voice still echoes through the halls of country music. But the forgotten secret of her final fears adds a haunting layer to her legacy, proving that sometimes the brightest stars burn with a knowledge the rest of us can't yet see. Johnny Cash. Songs Nashville tried to silence. When the name Johnny Cash is spoken, it carries a weight far beyond country music. Known as the Man in Black, Cash became a symbol of rebellion, faith, and truth all at once. His deep, booming voice gave working-class people a champion, and his songs cut through the glossy veneer of Nashville's carefully curated image. But behind the legend lies a forgotten secret. Nashville didn't always want to hear what Johnny had to say. In the 1950s and 60s, Cash rose quickly with hits like I Walk the Line and Ring of Fire. Yet, as his fame grew, so did his refusal to conform. While most Nashville acts stuck to safe themes of love and heartache, Cash sang about prisoners, Native Americans, addiction, and the forgotten corners of society. Songs like the Ballad of Ira Hayes, which told the tragic story of a Native American war hero discarded by his country, were considered too political for country radio. Executives tried to bury them, fearful that Cash's blunt honesty would alienate audiences, or worse, sponsors. Cash fought battles with the Grand Ole Opry as well. In one infamous moment, he kicked out the stage lights during a performance in 1965, leading to a temporary ban. Nashville painted him as unruly, a liability to the industry. Behind closed doors, executives pressured him to tone down his music to abandon the raw social commentary that defined him. But Cash never bent. The real truth, that some of his most powerful songs were shelved or ignored by radio stations, only came to light years later, as fans rediscovered them through reissues and documentaries. What Nashville had tried to suppress became the very core of Johnny Cash's myth, a man unafraid to give voice to the voiceless. Ironically, the industry that once tried to silence him now proudly celebrates him as one of its greatest icons. But the forgotten secret remains. Johnny Cash wasn't simply embraced by Nashville. He had to fight against it, carving his own path through defiance and truth-telling. Today, when listeners hear his songs, they don't just hear music. They hear a man who stood up to the machine and made country music more honest than it ever wanted to be. Loretta Lynn, the songs Nashville didn't want you to hear. If anyone embodied the voice of rural women in America, it was Loretta Lynn. Rising from poverty in the Kentucky hills, she transformed her hardscrabble life into songs that spoke directly to working-class women. With hits like Coal Miner's Daughter and You Ain't Woman Enough to Take My Man, Loretta became a trailblazer in country music. Yet hidden beneath her fame lies a startling truth. Some of her most powerful songs were banned, censored, or deliberately buried by Nashville. Unlike many of her peers, Loretta didn't shy away from taboo subjects. In 1972, she released The Pill, a bold anthem celebrating women's newfound freedom through birth control. The song caused a firestorm. Radio stations across the South refused to play it, and industry leaders labeled it immoral. To Nashville executives, Loretta was treading on dangerous ground by openly singing about women's rights and reproductive freedom. The ban was so widespread that The Pill couldn't reach its audience until women demanded it. Ironically, when it finally broke through, it became one of her most iconic hits. But that wasn't the only time Nashville tried to silence her. Songs like Rated X, which addressed the stigma faced by divorced women, and Wings Upon Your Horns, which explored the loss of innocence, were considered too controversial. Industry insiders urged her to tone down her lyrics, but Loretta refused. She believed that country music was supposed to reflect real life, and real life wasn't always pretty. The forgotten secret is that behind her glittering career, Loretta Lynn was constantly fighting censors and executives who wanted to control her voice. They feared that her music would alienate the conservative base of country fans. Yet, over time, those very songs helped redefine the genre, proving that country music could tackle real social issues without losing its soul. Today, Loretta is celebrated not only as the coal miner's daughter, but as a fearless pioneer who sang truths others were too afraid to utter. The fact that so many of her songs were once suppressed only deepens her legend, reminding us that sometimes the songs Nashville doesn't want you to hear are the ones that change everything. George Jones, the truth behind No-Show Jones. In country music, George Jones is remembered as one of the greatest voices to ever grace the genre. His delivery on songs like He Stopped Loving Her Today and The Grand Tour carried a depth of emotion that few singers in any style have ever matched. But alongside his towering artistry came a reputation that nearly destroyed him, one that Nashville tried for years to explain away. The nickname No-Show Jones wasn't just a funny jab. It was the result of a dark truth that only later came fully to light. Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, Jones developed a notorious reputation for missing concerts, sometimes entire tours. Fans would show up to sold-out shows only to discover that the star wasn't coming. Nashville promoters excused it as health problems or exhaustion, But the real story was darker. George was battling severe alcoholism and cocaine addiction, spiraling into self-destruction while still being pushed to perform by the industry that depended on him. Behind the scenes, his friends and even his wife at the time, Tammy Wynette, tried to intervene, but Nashville executives mostly looked the other way. As long as his records sold, they tolerated the chaos. The forgotten secret, revealed years later, was that Jones wasn't just an unreliable performer. He was a man drowning in addiction, often manipulated by those around him for profit. He once admitted in interviews that promoters sometimes sent limousines stocked with liquor and drugs just to ensure he would perform, a chilling glimpse into how little the system cared for his well-being. The damage was immense. Fans lost faith, venues canceled shows, and his reputation as No-Show Jones overshadowed his genius for years. Yet, with the help of his fourth wife, Nancy, George eventually clawed his way back, reclaiming his place as a legend. The industry now celebrates him as perhaps the finest voice country music has ever known. But the truth is that Nashville once enabled his downfall as much as it later applauded his redemption. Today, when we hear George Jones, we hear the ache of a man who lived every lyric. The nickname No-Show Jones is remembered with a chuckle, but the forgotten truth is far from funny. It was a story of addiction, exploitation, and survival that shaped one of country's greatest icons. Tammy Wynette, the pain behind the first lady of country music. No woman defined classic country quite like Tammy Wynette. With her iconic ballad Stand By Your Man, she became both a symbol of devotion and one of the most recognizable voices in American music. To fans, she was elegance and strength, a woman who sang about heartbreak with grace. But behind the glittering stage persona lay a forgotten truth. Tammy's life was filled with turbulence, pain, and secrets that Nashville worked hard to smooth over. Her marriage to George Jones was legendary in country lore. On stage, they were the golden couple, two voices blending perfectly into duets like Golden Ring. Offstage, however, their relationship was chaos. George's alcoholism and disappearances collided with Tammy's own struggles with prescription drug dependency. Their fights were infamous, sometimes violent, but rarely acknowledged by the industry at the time. Nashville promoted them as a romantic ideal, hiding the truth of their unraveling lives from fans. Even more troubling were Tammy's health battles. She underwent dozens of surgeries throughout her life, leaving her dependent on painkillers. For years, she kept this struggle hidden, pressured by managers and industry insiders to continue touring and recording. The public image of the flawless First Lady of Country didn't allow for weakness or vulnerability. Only after her death in 1998 did court documents and family testimonies reveal just how severe her battles had been. Perhaps the most shocking, forgotten secret came in 1978, when Tammy claimed she had been kidnapped at gunpoint outside a Nashville shopping center. For decades, fans believed the story as she told it. But in the years after her death, questions emerged. Some family members suspected the incident had been staged or connected to personal turmoil in her marriage. To this day, the truth remains murky, but the mystery lingers as one of the most haunting chapters in her life. Despite all of this, Tammy Wynette never let her pain eclipse her art. Her voice carried the sorrow of real experience, which is why songs like DIVORC and Till I Can Make It on My Own resonate so deeply. The secrets of her struggles, her health, her marriage, her mysterious kidnapping, only add weight to her legacy. Tammy wasn't just standing by her man. She was standing against impossible odds, leaving behind a story as heartbreaking as the songs that made her immortal. Charlie Rich, The Night He Burned Nashville's Biggest Stage. In the polished world of 1970s country music, few moments shocked Nashville more than the night Charlie Rich set fire to his own industry's most prestigious award. Known as the Silver Fox, Rich had risen from rockabilly beginnings to country stardom with smooth crossover hits like Behind Closed Doors and The Most Beautiful Girl. He was a Grammy winner, a CMA favorite, and a star embraced by both pop and country audiences. But hidden beneath his success was a simmering frustration with the very system that had elevated him. That frustration erupted in 1975 at the Country Music Association Awards. Rich, the previous year's Entertainer of the Year, was invited to present the same honor to his successor. As he stood on stage, visibly intoxicated, he opened the envelope and saw John Denver's name inside. Instead of announcing it, Rich pulled out a lighter, struck a flame, and set the card on fire before muttering Denver's name into the microphone. The audience gasped, and the television broadcast captured a moment that stunned millions. Nashville scrambled to cover the scandal. Executives downplayed it as a drunken prank, while others whispered that Rich was protesting the popification of country music. But the truth was far more complex. Behind closed doors, Rich had grown bitter about the industry's direction. He resented the push for polished, crossover-friendly acts like Denver, while traditional country voices were being sidelined. His act of defiance, though reckless, was a raw expression of his discontent with the way Nashville was reshaping its own identity. For years, this event haunted Rich's career. The CMA distanced itself from him, and Nashville quietly moved him to the margins. His reputation as the Silver Fox was tarnished, and what had once been a brilliant crossover career faded into obscurity. The forgotten secret was that Nashville didn't just disapprove of his outburst, it systematically pushed him out, erasing his contributions to preserve its polished image. In hindsight, Charlie Rich's rebellion looks less like a drunken mistake and more like a desperate cry against the industry's shifting values. He paid a heavy price for exposing that frustration in public, but his legacy remains tied to that burning envelope, a symbol of one artist daring to confront Nashville's machine in the most dramatic way possible. Merle Haggard, from prison bars to country legend. When people talk about outlaw country, they often point to Merle Haggard as the embodiment of the movement. With hits like Mama Tried, Okie from Muskogee, and The Bottle Let Me Down, Haggard gave a voice to working-class Americans who felt forgotten by the system. His music carried grit and truth. But what Nashville kept quiet for years was the fact that Merle himself had once lived the very life he sang about, a life that included time behind prison bars. As a teenager in California, Merle was far from the straight-laced image Nashville preferred. He drifted into petty crime, theft, and eventually serious trouble with the law. At just 20 years old, he was sentenced to San Quentin prison for attempted burglary. During his years there, Haggard watched hardened criminals, lived in fear, and even witnessed the execution of Carol Chessman, a moment he later said changed his life. While the official industry narrative celebrated Merle as a rough-edged poet of the people, the truth of his prison past was something Nashville initially buried. Executives worried it would tarnish his career if fans knew their rising star was a convicted felon. But Merle didn't hide it forever. Once his career took off in the 1960s, he began to weave his prison experience into his songs. Mama Tried was autobiographical, a confession of regret and rebellion. In time, fans embraced him not despite his past, but because of it. His songs felt real because they were real. What began as Nashville's greatest fear became Merle's greatest strength. The forgotten secret is how much Nashville initially resisted him. Insiders discouraged him from speaking openly about his criminal record, and radio programmers were uneasy with his rough image. Yet, Merle pushed forward, eventually becoming one of the most influential figures in country music. His honesty and authenticity redefined the genre, paving the way for the outlaw movement of the 1970s. By the time he was granted a full pardon by then-Governor Ronald Reagan, Merle had already transformed his life from prisoner to poet laureate of the working class. The system that once tried to bury his past eventually celebrated it. But the truth is clear. Merle Haggard succeeded not because Nashville embraced him, but because he refused to let them silence the story of where he came from. Dolly Parton, the songs Nashville tried to keep in the shadows. No name shines brighter in country music than Dolly Parton. With her dazzling personality, iconic style, and songs like Jolene and I Will Always Love You, she became a household name across the globe. To fans, Dolly seemed unstoppable. A woman who built an empire on talent, charm, and relentless determination. Yet behind her glittering success lies a lesser-known truth. Nashville didn't always welcome her boldness. Some of her most personal and daring songs were pushed aside, censored, or quietly buried by the very industry that celebrated her. In the 1960s, Dolly's early years on the Porter Wagoner show brought her national fame, but they also shackled her to an image Nashville wanted to maintain: sweet, safe, and non-threatening. when Dolly began writing songs that reflected her deeper truths about independence, heartbreak, and even female empowerment, executives grew nervous. Songs like Down from Dover, which told the devastating story of a young woman abandoned after an out-of-wedlock pregnancy, were deemed too controversial and received little promotion. Nashville quietly shelved her darker, more socially conscious writing, preferring the Dolly who could smile in sequins and sing light-hearted country tunes. Perhaps the most shocking example came with I Will Always Love You. Written as a farewell to Porter Wagoner after their professional split, the song was deeply personal and unapologetic. While it went on to become one of her greatest triumphs, insiders initially doubted its commercial potential, fearing the backstory would tarnish Dolly's image. It took Dolly's sheer determination to push it forward, and history proved her right. It became one of the most iconic songs ever written. The forgotten secret is that Dolly's catalog is filled with powerful songs Nashville never fully supported. Tracks like Evening Shade and Daddy Come and Get Me revealed stories of abuse, poverty, and abandonment that the industry avoided promoting. They didn't fit the glittery, family-friendly brand executives wanted to package. But those hidden songs reveal a side of Dolly often overshadowed by her public persona. A songwriter unafraid to tackle life's hardest truths. Today, Dolly Parton is celebrated not only as a singer, but as a cultural icon who broke barriers for women in country music. The songs Nashville tried to bury now stand as proof of her courage, showing that her true genius wasn't just in writing hits. It was in daring to tell the stories no one else would. Porter Wagoner, The Bitter Break with Dolly Parton. In the rhinestone era of country television, Porter Wagoner was a household name. With his flashy suits and big stage presence, he became one of Nashville's most recognizable stars in the 1960s and early 70s. His syndicated program, The Porter Wagoner Show, introduced countless Americans to country music and to a young Dolly Parton, who joined as his girl singer in 1967. Together, they created one of the most beloved partnerships in the history of the genre. But behind the smiles and sparkling duets lay a bitter truth that Nashville never wanted the public to see. Porter and Dolly's relationship was complicated from the start. While Porter gave Dolly a national platform, he also sought to control her career. He insisted on handling her business affairs, often putting his name on projects Dolly wanted to take in her own direction. For years, Nashville painted them as a perfect duo, his veteran authority balancing her youthful charm. Yet behind the scenes, Dolly felt stifled, her ambitions clashing with Porter's need for control. In 1974, Dolly finally decided to strike out on her own. To soften the blow, she wrote I Will Always Love You as a farewell song to Porter, a tender acknowledgement of gratitude and independence. But Porter did not take her departure lightly. He filed a $3 million lawsuit against her, claiming breach of contract. The legal battle revealed the harsh side of their partnership, exposing that the family-friendly duo image Nashville had sold to fans was more fragile than anyone imagined. The feud dragged on for years, leaving scars on both artists. While Dolly's star ascended to international heights, Porter's career slowly declined. Only decades later did the two publicly reconcile, with Dolly even visiting him in the hospital before his death in 2007. By then, the industry had rewritten their story as one of forgiveness and legacy, glossing over the bitterness that once defined their split. The forgotten secret is that behind the rhinestones and the smiles, Porter Wagoner's career was marked by one of Nashville's most painful breakups. His attempt to control Dolly may have backfired, but it also gave birth to one of the most enduring songs in music history. Today, fans remember Porter as a showman and Dolly's early champion. But the truth is that their partnership ended not in harmony, but in lawsuits, bitterness, and hard-won independence. Lefty Frizzell, the lost recordings that rewrote his legacy before Hank, before Merle, before George, there was Lefty Frizzell, a man whose smooth, slurred vocal style influenced an entire generation of singers. His songs like If You've Got the Money, I've Got the Time, and Always Late with Your Kisses shaped the very DNA of honky-tonk country. Yet despite his impact, Lefty's career collapsed far too soon, leaving him forgotten by many fans. What few people knew until decades later was that a treasure trove of his recordings, hidden away, overlooked, or deliberately shelved, would eventually surface and change how history viewed him. In the early 1950s, Lefty was a sensation. He rivaled Hank Williams in popularity and was considered one of the brightest stars in country. But his career spiraled due to alcoholism, poor management, and a volatile relationship with the Nashville establishment. By the 1960s, his name had all but faded from the charts. Nashville, hungry for polished new stars, quietly pushed him aside. To the public, he seemed like another tragic case of wasted talent. The forgotten secret lay in the vaults of Columbia Records and in tapes stashed away by friends and collectors. Lefty had recorded dozens of songs, some unfinished, some rejected by executives, that revealed the full scope of his artistry. Many were never released during his lifetime. Industry insiders, obsessed with marketable hits, ignored these tracks, dismissing them as too rough or out of step with the Nashville sound of the era. It wasn't until after his death in 1975, at just 47 years old, that these lost recordings began to emerge. Reissues and archival releases showed fans a new side of Lefty, a songwriter with extraordinary range, tackling themes far deeper than the honky-tonk baroom image he was pigeonholed into. Songs that had once been discarded suddenly felt timeless, earning him recognition as one of the most influential vocal stylists in country history. The tragedy is that Lefty never lived to see this revival. Nashville's neglect had already taken its toll, and his final years were spent in relative obscurity. Yet, the rediscovery of his hidden catalog proved that he had been far more than a one-hit wonder of the honky-tonk age. He was a pioneer whose influence stretched from George Jones to Willie Nelson and even Merle Haggard. Today, Lefty Frizzell is remembered as a foundational figure in country music. But the secret of his lost recordings reminds us that history often buries its treasures, and only time can bring them back to light. Townes Van Zandt, the genius Nashville ignored. Among country and folk fans, Townes Van Zandt is revered as one of the most gifted songwriters of all time. His haunting ballads, Pancho and Lefty, If I Needed You, Waitin' Around to Die, were filled with poetry, pain, and beauty. But during his lifetime, Nashville never fully embraced him. The city that crowned legends like Hank and George quietly turned its back on Townes, leaving much of his brilliance hidden until after his death. The forgotten secret is that Nashville didn't just overlook him, it deliberately sidelined a genius whose songs cut too deep for the mainstream. Born into wealth in Texas, Townes rejected privilege to chase music. But his path was marked by darkness. Struggling with bipolar disorder, he underwent electroshock therapy as a young man, leaving permanent damage to his memory. He turned his pain into songs that bared the soul of America's lost and broken. Yet Nashville executives didn't know what to do with him. His lyrics were too raw, his voice too fragile, his themes too bleak for the polished image country radio demanded in the 1970s. Instead of stadiums and television appearances, Townes found himself in dingy bars, coffee houses, and small gatherings. While peers like Willie Nelson and Emmylou Harris admired him, often covering his songs to greater success, Townes himself remained in the shadows. Nashville's machine kept him out of the spotlight, branding him as unmarketable. The cruel truth was that his songs were good enough for others to turn into hits, but not for the man who wrote them. Behind the scenes, his life spiraled into addiction. Alcohol became his constant companion, and stories of him sleeping outdoors or trading songs for drinks became legendary. Industry insiders whispered about his self-destruction, but no one intervened. By the time of his death in 1997, at just 52, Townes had lived as a cult figure, admired by fellow musicians, but barely known by mainstream audiences. It wasn't until after his passing that the world began to fully appreciate his genius. Documentaries, tribute albums, and reissues of his recordings revealed the depth of what Nashville had ignored. Today, Townes Van Zandt is spoken of with the reverence reserved for poets, his songs studied and celebrated by generations who recognize what the industry once buried. The forgotten secret of Townes is simple but devastating. Nashville didn't fail to recognize him. It chose not to. His truth was too raw, his beauty too dark, his art too unpolished. And yet, decades later, it is precisely those qualities that make him immortal.